So,
Ah,
welcome to another episode of the Sustainable Old Men. I'm Paul Harving, podcast host, coach, and do a few bits and pieces with videos now and then. What do you do, Howard?
I'm Howard Gunstock. I'm CEO of Carbon Capture. We grow seaweed to fight climate change, and we'd love you to buy some seaweed on roach if you ever get an opportunity to look at carboncapture.com.
Gavin, can you top that? What do you sell
Hi.
anything? Do you sell anything, Gavin?
No, I don't sell anything at all. I'm a sustainability consultant, and
Because I've got some
I don't.
seaweed for sale.
No, I don't have any seaweed for sale. I know where to get some.
Okay, you definitely should buy that. You definitely should buy some. You should get some seaweed on ropes. I would.
I,
I know a guy that can help you just get a good deal.
I'm looking for a reputable guy to sell me some seaweed.
I'll introduce you to my sales director.
So look, this week was a bit of a scary one this week, wasn't it? Because there was that article came out which pointed out that we're probably going to exceed 1.5 degrees temperature post pre-industrial revolution by 2027, and that is pretty serious, really. And what amazed me about that one, that came into the news media, it came into the news cycle, and it literally dropped out of the cycle so fast. It's almost like they thought, we've got to report it. Well, let's try and do it quick. Was it like Tuesday afternoon?
It
Whoosh,
was like
bang,
Boris
and we
Johnson trying to. It's like Boris Johnson trying to push away a party or something, wasn't it?
well, it came and went very,
Terrible.
very quickly, and there's no
Yeah.
other comment about it anywhere. I mean,
Paul,
go on.
Paul knows my feelings on this because I made a LinkedIn post on this very subject.
Oh, come on then, Gavin.
What actually happened
Go on.
was the announcement appeared on the BBC website and various other websites in the morning.
Hmm.
By the afternoon, Harry and Meghan had their car chase in New York, and that had knocked it off as the main headline. And frighteningly, in the single news cycle, as in less than 24 hours, the story about the 1.5 being breached in 2027 had disappeared. Harry and Meghan lasted 3, maybe 4 days, Paul, do you think?
We probably did actually. So
So relative significance.
Yeah, it's very don't look up, isn't it? I
It
mean,
is.
it's in that news cycle thing. If it's in vogue and people want to talk about it, that's great. But I think that there's a certain amount of let's just get the bare minimum out and deal with the consequences. And the consequences are, are multiple because not only are we talking about affecting human life on a really large scale, but bringing this out to something even further outside of probably our conversations generally is the fact that fertility levels across and reproduction levels across our planet are dropping at around about 1% per year. So those two factors are not uh, those crossover in the sense of not only are we going to lose hundreds of millions of people due to climate change, there isn't going to be a lot of people left on our planet to move stuff forward.
well, they
And the
will
ones that
be
are,
because I mean, like things go in cycles. So if it does die, if we could lose half the human race and still survive. Really, there are enough of us.
okay, so let me just give you an insight onto that, right? You could lose the human race, right? So let's just give you something that I know for a fact because it came up in a podcast I was listening to. Right.
Uh,
Japan currently have a population rate of one person per couple, right? So that means that for every two people, one person will be born, right?
You're
If
talking about the
you,
demographic shift, aren't you? That's what you're talking about.
it's a huge thing.
It is. Yes, I agree. I heard.
And it
Yes.
is, and it crosses over to what the impact of climate change, because the people that are most going to be affected by climate change are the people that probably would be in the position to have children.
And who won't? Who will choose not to?
But there's a few assumptions that are being made, um, rightly or wrongly.
Rightly, I said it.
Absolutely. So the projections are that when the climate heats up, the areas that will be most affected are Indian subcontinent, West Africa. Is it logical to assume that the population in those areas will sit there and take it?
No, they'll head north.
Absolutely
They're
not.
going to head north.
That's
Head
right.
north, head west. If you're a person from the Indian subcontinent and you've got family in, say, the UK, it was a former colony, former Commonwealth country,
Hmm.
you're going to migrate.
Well, I think
I'd like to see Swell of government try and stop all those boats.
yeah, but the thing is, and this is definitely something that will definitely never come up on a podcast and said by me ever again. Suella Braverman was right. There will be hundreds of millions of economic and climate change migrants over the next few years.
Yep.
I hope I never have to say those words again.
Well, I mean, she's not. I mean, she's right, but that's been known for a long time, and immigration is one of those things. Like immigration figures were out this week: 600,000 people came. When you look into those figures, most of those people are needed. They are valid people.
Yes,
You know,
they are.
they are.
The people who she's targeting, i.e., the small boats and the families of people coming over as students, are minuscule relative to the
Insignificant.
total.
Yeah, I mean, was it someone said about when how many Syrian refugees there were? It was only about like I know I don't know the numbers, but it wasn't that significant, and yet the damage it did and the problems it caused around it was enormous. I mean, you're talking in the under a million or so, under a million. So what happens when you've got a billion people moving? Because that's the total of problems you could be having with this climate change.
So, right, that's a potential consequence.
Yeah.
How do we avoid it from happening in the first place?
Well, we start helping them out for starters, getting some money out in those areas so they can start creating systems, avoiding their own move through the carbon cycle. I guess there's a lot of things to do, but I mean, everyone said they need a fund, don't they?
Well,
They do.
this is really interesting. So this is where the conversation crosses over with the carbon credits
It does.
conversation. So, um, carbon credits themselves, although the ones that have been slated over the last few days as worthless are truly that. But if you can create a carbon credit model which values ecology, not dissimilar to the basis process of this company here, but
Yes.
genuinely, without the plug, I mean this in all sincerity. You can create a carbon credit that values ecology, that is stored on a ledger similar to blockchain that shows a single source of truth. You can help the people who are right on the edge of climate change, because the people who are right on the edge of climate change generally are farming food that we need to eat. They're the people that are doing the real hard graft. If you can give those people money outside of the farming cycle, then they've got an economic modeling system that makes them no longer financially economic migrants, which is really the essence of what Braverman and her idiots are trying to say. You know, they're going to take money from our government, which is already depleted because we sold off all of our industry. That conversation aside, sorry, I'll get off that pedestal, that soapbox. But if we can actually give them money and all of a sudden they have an income to be able to do that, that makes it slightly more attractive for those people to migrate into a different country because they have an income. And what you're then being able to do is you're then allowing them to help themselves economically out of a difficult situation. It doesn't stop small islands disappearing and being flooded, etc. But at least they have the resources to be able to do some of those, some of the transitions from where they live in one location to another.
I just need to make something clear here for the audience. Really, just occurred to me, like we've been experiencing difficult weather over the last few years. We've had lots of floods, and we forget about them. But last year there was a big dry season at the beginning of the year, and then at some point there was water everywhere. So certain parts of the country were deluged because they got sudden influx of rain. and it happened. Didn't Germany have a major serious
Oh
floods
yeah,
last year?
they lost a town.
They lost a town, didn't they? So these events are happening because there's more energy in the system. You get more energy in the seas, the more evaporation, more water, more air movements, and suddenly the whole thing starts to become more chaotic. So you get more of it. And the temperature is 1.2. Are we 1.2 degrees? Currently 1.2.
Yeah.
So you go to 1.5, and this is not a linear scale. This is actually logarithmic. So what's going to happen is more and more energy. Each point degree of temperature is significantly more energy. So what the world will look like at 1.5 in terms of weather is, I'm fascinated from an interest point, I'm fascinated to see what it's going to be like. I'm curious what it's going to be like, but it's like, I don't want to go there if I can help it, but we are somehow going to have to get used to this in the space of like 5 years or less.
I think
talking.
Go on, Gavin.
You're talking about climate adaptation, which is something that we're not doing as a society,
as a species.
Indeed, but talking about those events last year, already in 2023, we've had a huge hot dry spell in Madrid.
Mm-hmm.
Far earlier than anticipated. We've had, I think we had our wettest February on record, followed by the driest March on, not necessarily on record, but they were just totally inconsistent. Howard, jump in if this is wrong. I believe that Cornwall has got a hose pipe ban already. Cornwall traditionally is a very wet county. And it's got a hosepipe ban in place till it's anticipated until December. So the events are happening, and again, I know Howard's mentioned this before, but it is very, very much don't look up. We just seem to be ignoring all the evidence. If you can remember the scene in Monty Python's Holy Grail, where the Michael Palin character saying, "Show me a sign, show me a sign, show me a sign."
Any sign.
Behind him, the bush is on fire, being hit by lightning and everything. No, can't see it. That's literally what we're doing as a species.
It is. It's I was listening to a really good podcast the other day called Crowd Science, and they were talking about climate change on there. And one of the really interesting pieces that came out of it was they were talking about the weather. And the difference between weather and climate change. But what was really interesting was they got a meteorologist to define what weather actually is. And in the context of what we're talking about, it's really useful. Weather is, and I'm paraphrasing this because I can't remember it word for word, is the uneven heating of our planet due to the different shapes and surfaces of our land from the sun's rays. And we can keep a constant ecosystem if the baseline is the same. But if you move some of the particles around, like, I don't know, increase the amounts of carbon dioxide particles per part per million, what you end up happening is an uneven starting point to heat up our planet, which means that we have completely inconsistent weather patterns. So the weather patterns of 50 years ago, for example, were based on a more consistent heating and even heating of our planet than they were today. Because the baseline didn't have as much CO2 and particles that prevented our planet regulating itself from solar heat. Our stratosphere doesn't allow heat to go out. That's why we have a greenhouse effect. And that's going to get exacerbated as we carry on living in a completely unsustainable fossil fuel type environment.
It's worth noting here for people, is that although we look at this thing about the temperature going to hit 1.5, it's only one of probably about 3 or 4, maybe 5 existential threats that we're currently facing.
Yeah,
7. Okay, all right. I know that because there's ocean acidification, which
you're talking about the planetary boundaries.
Planetary boundaries, yeah. We're overusing. We're overdoing.
I'm going to Google if I'm going to Google if it is 7 discreetly.
I think it's 9. I think it's 9.
I think it's 9.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of this was brought out in that the Club of Rome report of the limits to growth in 1970s, and which was ignored then. And it's like what we really need here is a fundamental shift in how we operate everything.
So that was something that you hooked me into. You helped me find this book by what's his name, Fluffy.
Oh yes, he's coming on my podcast soon, actually. Paddy the Fluffy.
Is he? Oh, brilliant! He was really Paddy the Fluffy. Unfortunate name, great book. Yes. Which is called Saving Tomorrow, I think.
There are nine existential threats.
9.
Sorry for depressing everybody here. We're trying to keep it light.
So,
I don't.
But what Paddy came up with, something that was really interesting. Sorry, just before I go, what Paddy came up with, which was brilliant, was changing business models from being a stakeholder investor fiduciary responsibility to being something. Was it Guardians of the Planetary Guardians, where every stakeholder, including the environment, has an interest in the business. That's the fundamental mind shift that is required to start to happen. And that means changing articles of association of business from it being purely about money and paying your shareholders and the people that are investing in me, to actually having an interest in all parties that operate in the business.
What was fascinating that he said that everybody just takes the articles of association from their solicitor and just signs them off, where you can actually write your own, and no one realized you could do that.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's interesting. What you're talking about, Howard, is the Better Business Act, which has got a campaign growing in the UK. And Paul's right. You can literally just change your articles of association. I've changed mine, my own company. B Corps, as an organisation, will tell you what they want the articles to be, and you're right, Howard, in the sense of the original articles talk about you develop the company and for the sole purpose of the benefit of the shareholders. By changing the articles of association, you can make it into for the benefit of the shareholders, stakeholders, and the planet, for sake of argument. You can choose whatever you want to, but it is, as Howard's and you as well, Paul, have implied, a very powerful statement.
I watched the some of, and I'm still ploughing through it, because there was a massive conference on in the EU last week called the Beyond Growth. Absolutely brilliant. So, I will put a link in the show notes for this, because it's a brilliant series of conversations, and they had some of the best speakers there, including Kate Roth. Can't read her name from here. Raworth, Kate Raworth, who created Donut Economics, which is the idea of bringing everything in. Kate Raworth. She was speaking, and all the big names were there speaking. But one of the things that came out at the end, which I thought was is this idea of changing the regulations so that companies have to move in this direction.
Yeah, and Europe's already going a little bit in that direction. And before I go down that road any further, one thing that was interesting about the Beyond Growth, Paul, you touched on it, but needs emphasizing. It was held at the European Parliament.
I know.
So it's got a very, very high profile. What Europe's doing is it's changed its disclosure regulations to have something called the the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And that has completely changed what bigger companies have to report, and eventually it will be all companies in Europe. And they're going to have to start talking about profit and loss, balance sheets, and then talk about what they've done in terms of pollution, water usage, climate change, biodiversity, the whole range. And talking to some people in the Far East, the Middle East, they're all going, Europe's got it right. whereas America supposedly is the world lead. But all America's sustainability guidance is focused on what do investors want to know about sustainability.
Yeah.
But
Who's the
that's
biggest stakeholder? The people.
but that's the point about American policy, isn't it? All American company policies, and they are literally bound by it. They have there's no option. Everything has to be done for profit maximization. That's how
Yeah.
American business works.
Yeah.
So that goes back to how you operate as a company. And one of
Does.
the, when we talk about how we move the dial or turn down the dial, although there's a 66% chance of hitting 1.5 degrees, there are things that we can do. There are big shifts that we can, as company owners, as people that we can do. I know I plug that a lot, but genuinely, there are things that we could that we can do, and it's about creating the environment, the culture to allow people to have the confidence to be brave. I know we've got greenwashing on one side, but a colleague of mine, Adam Bastock, was talking about green hushing, where companies are slightly embarrassed about their green policy, so they don't even talk about it. And there needs to be an in-between where you're doing something right and you have the confidence to be able to say that you support the green activity, because actually the green activity that you're doing is the right thing to do. And we need to foster those practices, and they come from when we start to think about how we run our businesses in the same way. And I really don't think it's dissimilar, in the same way that 20 years ago, leadership was about strong, directive, sometimes charismatic, but do what I say, follow me, that sort of autocratic type thing. And over the last 10 or 20 years, maybe 25 years, it's become slightly more inclusive, more about collaboration, more about fellowship, more about ethics and morality. It has a much richer, deeper way of being. And I think the agenda for greening our planet and healing our planet and reinvigorating the ecology on our planet has to follow or should follow a similar sort of path, right?
And that's
sorry, Paul.
Go on. No, go on. You go.
That's interesting because there's, for the past 10 years, for sake of argument, the sustainability side, the climate change side, and the extinction rebellions of this world have focused on negativity. The world's going to end. The world's going to end unless we do X, unless we do Y. Recently, in the last 6 months, I've seen a switch where people are now talking about, we need to have a brave new world. We can achieve this, and it's positive if we do some action. So with the motivation is slightly shifting to a more positive outlook.
It's maturing.
I think it's a recognition of something, and that is that humanity is driven by story. I say this a lot on the podcast all the time.
I say it.
And the problem is, at the moment, the only stories that we have in this world that come out of Hollywood or the big books and those bits and pieces, or anything on Netflix, it's all either more of the same, and that more of the same either leads to a dystopian future where there's an elite and an impoverished, or it leads into a wrecked society. There's never given that I never see any stories or read any stories where there is a positive outcome. But there's now a new genre which is turned up on Amazon called cli-fi. Climate science fiction, climate fiction. And it's a growing genre.
On what channel? On Amazon?
On Amazon, yes. You can find it on Amazon. So the stories are coming. That's the point. The stories are coming. And we need stories, the romances. Really we need romance stories set on on a sustainable farm. We need romance. We need to have that sustainable backdrop to life so people can see there's somewhere to go to.
Can I try and tie that in with something that Howard mentioned.
Is it going to be about seaweed?
No, I'm not mentioning seaweed, and I'm not mentioning the company.
Okay, just a thought.
Other suppliers of seaweed are available.
No, they're not. That's the point. No, they're not.
So Howard mentioned a shift in management philosophy.
Yeah.
You've mentioned storytelling and romance and whatever. It's ironic that we are the sustainable old men, because that shift in management philosophy has coincided with the gender shift in terms of management.
Yeah.
And the storytelling will appeal to the better gender, not ours,
Agreed.
the other side, the
Agreed.
others. And that gender will lead the change. The sustainability industry is very female led.
It's really, again, this is really super interesting, because I talk about this quite a lot when I run my leadership programs and stuff. I talk about the climate, the situation with our climate would not be as bad as it is if there'd been more women involved in the decision making process in the first place. And then you can also take it to a different stage, which is also really interesting and fascinating, and something also to do with my background. So, coming from an HR background, there are very strong comparators, I believe, in the narrative between where personnel was compared to corporate and company strategy 30 years ago, where it was very much a handmaiden function and they didn't have a seat at the table. They just justified policy and procedure and practice, to being human resources, where it became something that was a true business partner into the organization. And the comparator between sustainability not having a proper seat at the table, generally being a general role that gets shoved onto someone else's responsibility, and not really having that narrative, to where it's starting to move up to now. Those sorts of things are really powerful, and I think one of the things that we need to be able to do is empower those people who are in those roles, to give them the most amount of choices. These actions directly have our ability to affect whether we get to 1.5 degrees in 2027.
Well, we're going to get there. There's no way going to stop getting to 1.5 degrees by 2027. The shift, we'd have to stop doing everything now.
Yeah, but okay.
Just for the record, the prediction is we hit 1.5 degrees once in this decade, and it's most likely to be 2027. Doesn't mean that we've hit 1.5 from that point on. We'll still go up and down.
I remember
the trend is still upwards.
Doesn't it go up and down? Doesn't it? As the seasons change, the CO2 levels rises and falls.
But you're right. The general trend is in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
But I think what we're going to start to see is, as human life starts to have a death toll, because it will be, as we start to see those sorts of things, and we start to see it affecting the food supply chain. There will have to be just a way of changing the way that we address the basics of our business and our lives, because we've seen it mature in other sectors, in other industries, in other functions, in other environments, where the maturity happens. We're intelligent enough not to put our head in the sand. We're seeing the narrative that is not dissimilar to your point the other week about the climate narrative being very similar to the tobacco industry. And actually, we learn faster. And I think the expression is, life has never moved this quickly, and it's never going to be this slow again.
I mean, we can do this. I mean, the greatest, most successful piece of world-class legislation was the Montreal Protocol. And we stopped using CFCs in a space of like years.
Yeah.
Yep.
The benefit of this is about the ozone hole. We all remember the ozone hole, which was caused by chlorofluorocarbons in aerosols and various refrigerants that was damaging the ozone layer.
Yeah.
So And it was literally proved conclusively that this was doing this, and a protocol was put together, and industry, and I mean, the US actually had a government department that was job was to find a solution to this and sort it. They literally put lots of brain power to this to find different chemicals and different processes, and across the world this was done overnight effectively, and it took a couple of years.
And 40 years we've basically put fixed the hole that was in our ozone. It's almost back to that pre-time now.
Yeah.
So these things, the good news is we can there's a few pieces of good news, right? Climate change happens slowly, so we've got a while before our irreparable damage. The 1.5 degrees is an up and down thing, and we can change the trajectory for future generations. And we have got to be a lot less selfish and a lot more inclusive. And with those sorts of ways of working and people taking, clear action and future guardian models of business occurring, etc., we will be able to transition. But we need people who can act as leaders and really take a big step up and say, I'm going to do these things.
And it's about people asking those questions at work, isn't it? It's about saying, well, what are we doing about this?
It is, but there is a fundamental challenge to this, which is climate change is inequity, because the top 5, 1, 10% of people in terms of wealth are responsible for as much carbon emissions as the bottom 50%. So there's a definite inequity there, which that needs to be addressed. But are you going to stop Taylor Swift or the Kardashians from flying from Las Vegas to the pond outside Las Vegas? That's the challenge.
I guess when their fans start saying, I don't agree with you doing this, and when enough of them say it, they'll change.
But it comes back to Howard made a fantastic point on one of the previous episodes.
Did I miss it?
He did.
I must have missed Howard making a fantastic point.
Yeah, it was about carbon capture. No, it wasn't about carbon capture. It wasn't about carbon capture.
That's fine.
It was about Sebastian Vettel.
Yes, it was.
Who'd seen the light. Admittedly, a little bit late, and he did feel incredibly guilty about it. But at least he's standing up, and he has a profile to do it. Yeah. Fantastic. We need more people like that.
Actually, I saw a Twitter feed yesterday with oh gosh, his name's gone out my head now.
That's why we're old men.
I know.
That's it. That's exactly it.
As soon as I said that, the name just went.
You see, Paul's
match of the day guy. I want to go.
Gary Lineker.
Gary Lineker. He was saying he supported the actions of Just Stop Oil.
Yes.
He could understand why they were doing what they were doing. And I thought that was absolutely amazing for him to say that.
Yeah. He is a great leader.
Yeah, he said he agrees with what they're trying to achieve, doesn't necessarily agree with their method of doing it, because he came out and there was a Just Stop Oil guy who chained himself to a goalpost in an Everton match.
Okay.
And he went, right idea, wrong execution.
Yeah,
he wasn't executed. I hope he wasn't executed.
But he was an Evertonian.
What Gary Lineker said, actually, I believe, because I think I saw it, was in fact I did see it. He said was that the only change that ever happened was from civil protests and quiet protests, in the sense of taking civil action. And he said that in the future, that he hopes that those people making those changes will be the ones that are revered in history.
That's a nice place to end this conversation. Do you not think?
Be good to each other and good night.
Can I just say, we have gone through an entire episode where he hasn't named a certain company. He's pointed to it, but he hasn't mentioned it by name.
You did it for me.
I did.
In case anyone wants to know, Howard runs a company called Carbon Capture.
Can we edit that bit out?
Right.
Thanks, everybody. It has been a joy, as always, to be with you, you sustainable old men, and looking forward to the next time.
Cheers, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Did he just use jazz hands?
Yeah.
Really? Oh.